we're appreciating it.
I didn't hear you, but
Sounded we're like,
Can you hear us now?
yeah, I can hear you.
I was just saying, it's nice to see your smile, but our smiles can't be seen at all.
Oh, sure.
Okay, so we're gonna, we posted and sent out last night, the latest version, I think it's 7.1, or is that?
David just sent me another one, I just reposted it.
Okay, so if we can pull at least up on our computer, that would be helpful. What I'd like to do with this version is,
Hi,
there's David, great.
Oh, my gosh.
There are two sections of this bill that need more attention than others, only in the sense that the others we've talked about a lot, but two sections in limbo, and I want to make sure we get through those sections this morning, if not the whole bill, and hopefully we'll vote on the bill tomorrow so people have more time tonight to digest everything. But David, if you could have a seat,
Sure.
take the hot seat.
How does this work? Where should I sit?
No, I just have a question.
That's a good seat.
Are you gonna be able to see the screen? Am I big head?
No, I'm just gonna be the voice over your shoulder.
Do you want to come to your chair though?
Even if it's the old one, it's close.
Would you put that out there, each of us?
Oh, thank you. I'm okay.
We'll do a little loud,
Appreciate
but,
It's
it's
all
making
bizarre.
the chair for witnesses more uncomfortable. They tend to be shorter in their presentations to us.
You can talk faster.
Okay, so
Spikes.
the two sections that I'm referring to, one has to do with the missing middle. And there's been some debate around the level of perpetual affordability, I should say the level of affordability, the length of time, the deepness of the affordability covenants. And so we're going to have, I've tried to draft something that we can work around and see where we go with that. And the second thing was an issue that was brought to us by the administration and seal it pretty late in the game. We tried to draft something on that, but I think it needs some work. It has to do with piloting certain communities to have interagency involvement to produce these model citizens for affordable, low-cost housing, and putting some money towards that and how that would work. So let's deal, David, first with the affordability in terms of missing middle, and if we can pull up on the screen the latest version of that we worked on. Exactly how to do that.
I'm gonna pull it up on my device. Is that easier?
It just got drafted this morning, so I don't know that.
We grab the latest version. I've got draft 9.1.
Is it in that one?
Dated 3/8. Is that the latest version?
Indeed, sir.
Can I just,
He is, and where did you find it?
it's on our webpage.
Van, Scott, and David are on it.
And I just asked Tony to print some for us,
Great.
and then if Ellen wants to share it, it can be on that screen. If you'd like.
Ellen, can you hear Scott?
Yes, but was that an option, or is that something that would be helpful or not helpful?
I think it would be helpful if you could put
Okay.
in this section. It's not, the whole section, I think it's only about 2 pages long. Right? The affordability section is even shorter.
Yeah.
So while that's going on, I'll try and frame the issue a little bit, then David can correct me. So I think the tension has been the original version of Missing Middle came with sort of no strings attached to the incentives and the subsidies that were going out to contractors and to home buyers being continued on into the future or being captured in the home for the benefit of future owners, which is contrary to the norm, what we've done in the past when we've developed constructed or purchased houses with VHCPCB and other monies where there's been this concept of shared equity. So to the extent you help people get into a home and they're of lower middle income, they agree under the traditional shared equity formula that 75% of the appreciation of that home into perpetuity stays with the home to reduce the value, the cost of the home to the next owner. There was none of that in the bill. I think VHFA moved to a situation where they said, okay, there's two parts to the subsidy. One is what they call the value gap, which is to help the builder construct the home at a cost that is higher by need be, because the cost of construction than what the assessed value is. So that's one part of the subsidy. The second part of the subsidy is for the home buyer who may be of limited means to be able to afford that particular house. So I always use the example, it costs $400,000 to build a house now. The house is only assessed at $350,000. The person can only afford $300,000. So there's $50,000 going to the builder, $50,000 going to the homeowner, and the question, there was none coming back to the state or staying with the house. What the administration had proposed is that the value gap is lost forever. We need to get that money out to get the home constructed, but the savings to the subsidy to the homeowner, the second $50,000, could continue with the house going forward to the next buyer. But if you think about that, over 50 years, that $50,000 is going to be relatively worthless. So you really haven't saved that much money to the perpetual affordability. The shared equity formula would have that 50,000, would not really pay attention to that $50,000. But whatever that home sold for, whatever the profit was to that homeowner, he or she would only keep 25% of that profit, and the rest would go to reduce the price of the home to the subsequent buyer. The parties, the stakeholders, and the administration of the meeting to try and come up with a resolution. I don't know if they've gotten there yet, but I decided to put something on the table for discussion, and that would be the concept of let me just back up. One of the ideas that's been missing from all these discussions is that there's no need for this home that's being built with a lot of state dollars to continue to go to a low and middle income homeowner. So even if you're trying to preserve some of the subsidy, a millionaire could come in and just buy that, put a cash thing down and say, I want that home. And now we haven't saved that home for a lower
Right.
middle income person. So I put that concept in, and I think, what other concept was in there, David? A new concept. Or not a new
Percent at
concept.
point of sale.
You have a limitation on the subsidy, you have the opportunity for the shared equity model.
Oh, okay. So, and then basically I left it up to the agency whether they wanted to carry forward the discount to the first home buyer, or whether if they could find buyers that were willing to buy the shared equity model, they could choose that model. So it's sort of splitting the baby, giving discretion to the agency depending upon who comes forward. One of the arguments I hear repeatedly is if we do the shared equity model in this thing, when you deal with people at 100% to 120%,
Yeah.
nobody's going to want the home. I don't quite believe that. I mean, you're still giving you a lot of value to get the home, but people are saying there won't be any buyers because they don't want to give up all that equity into the future. So this gives them the choice as an individual homeowner comes forward as to how they want to structure it. That's my lay perspective of things. Now, David, if you want to just confirm that or add to it or help the committee understand what's in here.
Sure, David Hall, legislative council, live and in person. On page 32 of this draft, we were talking about 9.1. So as the chair indicated, the revised language, you'll see highlighted subsection B. So it used to just basically be B1.
Right.
But so this, 3 criteria governing the use of funds, basically, or parameters really. So the first one, And it's a may, not a shall. The may use funds to provide the direct project subsidy up to 35% for eligible development costs, income eligible buyers, provided the amount of the subsidy shall not exceed the value gap, the difference between the development cost and the total assessed value. Item 2 here is chair indicated in the alternative to direct subsidy, the agency may use funds and may prioritize projects with one or more partners using the shared equity model. That's a little bit general language, but it gives them the flexibility to structure those relationships and find partners who would be willing to buy into this concept and participate under that model, however it manifests.
Is there a specific definition of shared equity model?
Not that I'm aware of.
Should there be one?
But
It's sufficiently clear.
I think it's intentionally general, actually. That's,
How did, when the language that I sent you, I don't think I used that term, but, or maybe I did. But I thought I sort of
But there's a formula that is there.
captured that, a certain percentage of the appreciation as opposed to, we could easily come up with a shared equity definition. I don't know whether we want to say specifically it has to be 75%. We could give some flexibility. The way it's been implemented historically is at 75%. I think we should say a little bit more than just a shared equity model, because that could be, the idea is of a shared equity model is to preserve more affordability or perpetual term. If you did a shared equity model and said you only have to give back 1%,
Right, that would hardly,
end up with less than what you would have under the first alternative, which is not the goal.
so then perhaps,
Shared equity at minimum level. Okay, we'll try to come up with some language on that. I
yes,
think
if we could modify that by saying, in order to preserve, in the effort to maintain permanent affordability or something.
Well, let's let David do his thing. And we can criticize it. I think that's I think if you left it there, then you have potential not litigation, but you have an argument. I mean, some people will say, well, shared equity model clearly means what we always meant it to be, but other people will
That's
say,
the point.
yeah.
I think we need just some clarity of the definition of what it is we're talking about.
Okay.
Define shared equity, maybe those who use it have that.
Okay, let's keep that.
the third piece, subdivision 3 on line 11, just that's the part about sure funds that are used here will remain permanently available for future buyers who meet the eligibility criteria of this section. So
that's the first part of that sentence was in the administration's proposal. The last part is what I was talking about, to
Right.
make sure that we're not letting anybody get to benefit from this money in the future. And I think that we'll probably get some feedback from Laura and other people if that's a problem, but it seems to me that almost every person they deal with, they check on their income and certify them for eligibility for their mortgage and stuff like that. So down the road, 20 years, if this person's selling, they're going to have to, EHFA is going to have to certify the buyer as being
Right.
this house. So I'm sure.
So that's just another question to make sure that I thoroughly understand this. Does this limit the purchase of the house to someone who meets eligibility requirement, thereby limiting the ability of the seller or anybody else to capitalize on it? I mean, if that I believe is the intent, but
But not fully limited.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there are going to be buyers out there, but we want to direct, that's what perpetual affordability is all about, with everything that EHCB does in terms of creating home ownership. They all have perpetual affordability, but they have the 75% thing, and they qualify the next buyer. So they're at like 60 to 80%. This would be up to 120%.
Always a problem I have with the term affordable housing, but that is a definition that probably ought to be rewritten to read the term subsidized housing.
Could be. No, as you know, I'm a big fan of getting something back for our money. That
Yeah, I mean, it's public money.
I absolutely understand that.
It's a public extension of our public trust.
Okay.
That's all the changes in this middle piece.
That's it for the changes in this.
Yep.
Okay. Let's go on. I don't know if you've had a chance to. So what I did, we got this memo from, I think Chris could probably talk about it. Us, my understanding is the administration supports this, but it's a new concept that we touched upon a couple of times very generally. And I didn't think the language that we had in the earlier drafts was actual. So, Chris, would you be willing to just, before David walks us through the language, would you be willing to explain the concept?
What section or what concept?
Yeah, Chris Cochran, Department of Housing and Community Development. Gus Seeley put together, it's just basically a white paper that talked through kind of a proposal to kind of feeding off kind of some of the governor's messaging about, how do we make transformative investments in communities? And how do we, a big part of the housing costs that we see is the sidewalks, the roads, the water, wastewater infrastructure. And how can we leverage these additional funds that the department has, that the Agency of Natural Resources has, that V-Trans have, to make investments, kind of pick a few communities, kind of really try to get the ball out of the park, do it right, combine some VHCD money with agency money, focus on a few communities, and try to, I think it'll take some time to make something like this happen. But I think it is a unique opportunity we have, and it is a good idea for how do you partner with the community to work with state agencies to really make a difference in housing. That's a high level overview of it. My boss, Commissioner Hanford, has seen it, has liked the idea. I was not able to talk with folks in the governor's office about their opinion on it, and they're going to look at it in the context of the overall bill. So that's the only question that I need to get resolved from the administration.
Where's the money coming from?
I think as proposed in the bill, it was VHCD's funding for housing. VHCD was proposing is using some of their existing funds to buy down some of the costs of the housing, to ensure there was a good affordability component to this new housing units that were built or homes that were built. So I believe that's my understanding. Jen Holler said she's going to be here about now, so I think she could probably fill in some of those details.
Senator Clarkson?
So help me understand this, because we have all this it would be great to marry the infrastructure money that's coming to us, which we are anticipating, right? I would love to not see housing money spent on lampposts, sidewalks, or roads. I mean, it's a great idea to do a whole package. I agree that you kind of need to do the whole thing. But that involves a lot of money that could otherwise be built for, I mean, I'd love to marry the money that's meant for water, sewer, lampposts, sidewalks, roads.
And that's precisely what this is.
Okay, so that's marrying another pot of money, not using VHCB money for that. Okay, I wasn't clear on that.
HCD money, as I understand, will be used to help with the housing aspects of it, to buy down the purchase price. And here she is, right on time.
There she is.
Jen, your ears were burning, I'm sorry. We were just initially talking through about Gus's proposal.
The sidewalk infrastructure complement to the housing.
Oh, okay.
Not to put you on the spot.
Would it be helpful to speak to the intent behind that, or the concept, or what's going to
We're
help?
just starting out
Okay.
in terms of this section, and it might help, David, if you could, or somebody could pull the new section language.
It's section 5, what page, Chris?
Sorry, Chris.
14.
Page 14.
And I don't know, David, this is awkward, but I got a memo from Jen a little while ago that I forwarded to you. I don't know if it made it into the language yet. I doubt it, right? Yeah. So we can work off the language we have here. Perhaps we need to talk about this at length. What the way we structured it in this latest draft, you recall there were a few sort of pieces in the original housing bill that made direct appropriations of $5 million each for new generation, commercial to residential, large employer, and the way I structured it, we had some testimony on this. I said, I think the only way we're going to deal with these things, because they're all issues in and of themselves, is to give the authority to the HCB out of its appropriations that it's getting of ARPA funds to do up to a certain amount of work in these areas if they choose to. So I picked $5 million for three things. One was this community partnership for neighborhood development, which is what Chris is talking about. One for workforce housing,
Yeah.
For employers, large employers.
Right.
And the third was conversion from commercial. So it's just, if they're getting $100 million, whatever they're getting over the next couple of years, if they want to take $5 million out in pilot programs in this area, I call them low-hanging fruit people who really want to, who want to do these things, but can't pencil out to work. If they want to fund a project in that area, they can do it sort of in a demonstration way. But we're talking just right now about this community partnership for neighborhood development, and obviously $5 million, especially when you have to share it with other things, is not going to go a long way. And we really haven't talked in this thing about money from other agencies. So I'm starting to feel real uncomfortable with this idea. Sort of maybe money can be set aside to, really study it or get a consultant in to come up with a really detailed plan of action, or it can be done within the house.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you could just propose this for
could
the
be
house.
as a platform on which to talk about it. But that having been said, we got a brief overview from Chris as in lay terms of what is being designed here. What was your and Gus thinking in proposing this, and much feedback we've gotten so far?
Do you know what, Jen, sit down?
Sure. So I thought you had a question right now.
No, I was just say David has a chair.
Good morning, Jen Howard,
Good morning.
on Housing and Conservation Board. Very, very nice to see you.
Good to be here, good to have you in person.
So this helps.
Sure, yeah, thanks, Chris. So I think what it might help to do is to touch back to some testimony that you had Gus in on this bill a few weeks ago. And at that time, you were thinking about these concepts around the large employer concept and the commercial conversion concept, and there were some others in the draft bill at that time that you were thinking through. And Chair Sarakian had said, I don't know, I think these are going to need some more vetting. I'm not sure that they're really ready to go as a full program. And Gus, what about the idea if you take a look at these with some of the funding that you have? And Gus said to you, yes, we could try to do that. So that's part of what's embedded here that we would use up to, and it doesn't specify whether it's state funds or American Rescue Plan Act funds, which is probably a good thing because some things are going to be eligible for ARPA and some aren't, and that gives us the flexibility to do both. It doesn't allocate additional funding to us, although you will continue to hear from us that it's our base appropriation that allows us to do most of these things. But we would use the funding we have up to $5 million for the following purposes or activities, and our statute are usually described as activities. So one of them is the Community Partnership for Neighborhood Development. I'll pause on that for now. The other is the idea of matching grants for employers. Senator Sorokin mentioned that I offered some slight edits to this morning. It's basically the same framework, but we would say, I think it's not specifically matching grants. It's more around grants to employers, and it doesn't say large because I don't know that we necessarily want them to be large. It might be a small child care provider, or it might be somebody else that we would provide grants to employers that create new housing. We don't really want them to just take housing that exists and make it available to only their employees. That's not serving our overall state goals. But if they were to create new housing, the HCD could look at whether or not we could provide them with a $5,000 grant per home. I don't know exactly how that would work, but it's just a placeholder for that idea.
Just a question, Jen, when you refer to new housing, you mean new from the ground up, or is renovation or refurbishment of the existing property something?
Typically how we thought about that, and I don't think it's defined in statute anywhere, it's either new construction or bringing something that's offline because it's dilapidated, doesn't meet code or whatever, but if it is worked to an existing unit and brings it back online and into service, we would consider that a new home. And then the next one is.
So let me just pause there. I read the original version and it said, well, I didn't read the original version, the latest version. It said for the employer housing, it said up to $5,000. And I said, that's got to be a typo. What, how much is $5,000 going to help an employer provide a unit of housing? So what I asked David to do is to track for these things the same thing we did for ADUs, and it said you can give up to 50,000, but it has the employer or other sources have to provide 80% of the cost of development. So it's 50,000 or 20%. You didn't seem to pause on the $5,000 as being problematic. I mean, in your world, are you going to want to deal administratively with employers for the purpose of just giving them $5,000?
There's so much about this that we don't know yet how it would work. I readily agree, and I have not seen this particular version. It looks like your thinking evolved a little bit further. So our idea would be to, if you want us to do this, to direct us to use our existing funds to explore how we might be able to support employers creating housing for the workers, but whether that's permanently affordable or not. I mean, originally we used the $5,000 that had been in there originally. I don't know. I don't know if this, the way it's prescribed here, it may very well work. We may find employers who want to do that, but we would need to explore that.
So what do we know about employer, we hear about the Bennington Hospital trying to buy some homes and to put their employees in. What do we know at this point about the interest of employers trying to house their employees? Because I'm thrown a little bit by the comment that it has to be new construction or substantial renovation. I thought like Bennington, they were just interested in buying an apartment complex that's already there and putting their people in. Sounds like under this, they wouldn't qualify for it.
Well, the way I just described it, maybe they would. So it comes down to what is your policy goal? Is your primary goal to create new housing? To make sure that large employers have a place for their employees to live, or is it really about tapping into the energy and interest and needs of the employer community to help create more housing? Because if we don't have enough housing and they use that for their employees, that makes it more difficult for somebody else. So
and I think it would be, I mean, in an ideal world, you'd have what they're talking about in the house with the CTE kids, helping employers build more housing. It would be great if all these programs would come together and work together. But I think for me, I'm personally interested in incenting them to build new or bring
Right.
online
I-
unused.
I agree, and that's what we've been doing with the VHIP program, with the revolving loan
Yeah.
program, with the ADUs, with the missing middle, everything is giving some state help to create new housing. So this is another area that we might tap into. But I think for consistency purposes, first of all, this is all enabling. It doesn't mandate anything.
Right.
Right.
So they can have some flexibility, but I think if we stay within the guidelines of what we're proposing in the ADU section, which is they can get up to $50,000. And I think is it 20, Jacob, is it 20% in 79 in terms of matching funds for ADUs? For VHIP? There is a 20% rule somewhere in VHIP or a 30% rule. So I think we should just keep it consistent throughout. Because I mean, I don't want to be
And it's $30,000
for VHIP, but for ADUs.
50 for ADUs,
Josh,
although
okay,
VHIP can do ADUs also.
well, VHIP, ADUs are part of the VHIP statute. But we're setting a difference at Josh's request, we're setting a difference.
Is it
Max.
20%?
How much?
20.
Okay, so I interrupted you, but that was helpful. We have to make that change to make sure, there is that guardrail.
Yeah.
And it's money to put towards employer housing. And the same thing for developers who are looking for conversion housing. What else do you remember from the language that you sent is different?
May I just go back to the first part of your question?
That's right.
The first part of Michael's question was, have you had interest from any employers about developing new housing? Have you?
At various times, yes. So we've talked to Middlebury College and places like Evermart and Cabot, and I think that, and also know that other employers have talked to our nonprofit partners, because that's usually where the project concepts come together, whether it's Champlain Housing Trust, Wyndham and Windsor Housing Trust. I don't know.
Because I know
We've
there's
had
a
those
lot of interest.
conversations, but
Yeah, in the Upper Valley.
the need is so great that they have been in touch with, there are various conversations taking place around that.
Okay,
I wouldn't say that the nut is cracked yet, and we know exactly how it would work, but there is interest.
and so hopefully by the time this gets fleshed out through the house process, the process through the house, employers will weigh in with you, with the house, with whomever, as we proceed.
No,
And I think
it's
we
good.
would need to do a lot of
I
learning
think
and
it's-
exploring before next, and report back to you.
I think for the purpose of establishing a platform to build these ideas, this is a good one
Yeah.
as a starting point.
Agreed.
So it will be up to the committee whether they want to put those specific parameters that are in number 2 right now, or direct us to explore different ideas, with a cap of a certain amount per home, which I think what I had shared with you this morning was 5,000 per home, but I don't know if that's the right number or not. So those are 2 different approaches.
Yeah. I like the comparability throughout the statute that they use. So keep
In terms of incentives.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So number 3, that's a little different than what I had seen before too. What we would propose would be to say, for conversion of commercial properties to residential use, we'd be authorized to make grants up to $50,000 for supplemental grants to a project, up to $50,000 for costs that aren't otherwise covered by other sources, was one way to think about it. But
that would need to be tied to the also.
But this work-
the
but this
development
basically-
of new units. I mean,
Yeah.
Because, someone could come in and say, take this commercial property and turn it into 50 units, and if the most they can get is $50,000. I think we should just keep the consistency with 80. If they're producing a unit of housing, of new housing, and this would be new housing because it'd be commercial to residential, they should get up to $50,000 per unit. I don't see why they'd get a landlord
Yeah.
who has substandard housing, being able to get 30,000 in that case.
Commercial conversions are expensive, so I think we find that the 50,000 ends up being the lower amount. And then the community partnership for development would
Can I-
really,
Sorry, I don't know, Michael, do you want me to raise my hand from Zoom?
It's Keisha.
She's on.
set it around.
Oh,
It's Keisha. I
we
think
don't, we
just
don't see
speaking-
you, I just see your name. Good morning. How
Good
are you?
morning. Good, how are you?
I have a question.
Yeah, I'm trying to make sure I understand if this is 50,000 per unit or per project. And I'm just worried for a larger project that can have a big impact. 50,000 may not even be worth necessarily the effort of applying for, given that our processes can be, either lengthy or involved. It just feels like potentially a lot of effort for a little bit of funds when I don't think there's going to be that many projects that are able to take advantage of this. I would personally err on the side of increasing the amount, maybe to 100,000.
You're channeling.
Scott, I'm not sure if you're aware, I think we've lost the committee feed on YouTube.
What just happened?
I don't know if that just got worse.
Well, it says live on YouTube on my screen.
Scott, we can hear the committee through your Zoom, but we have lost visuals of the bill, the committee. Yeah.
Okay.
Change that number if you want.
Okay.
Enable,
Are you,
it ties their hands a little bit, but.
Keisha, you back?
We're back and you're back on YouTube. That means as well. So, and now we have the bill back.
We did just say that, and it was the language, at the very least, will be changed to say that $50,000 applies to each unit.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah, it would have to be each unit, but the challenge is at the moment, we're only putting $5 million to all three of these projects.
Mhm. Oh, it's all under $5 million allocation now.
Yeah, and
So
that could go in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
I'm trying to stay within the numbers we've been given in terms of ARPA money by the administration and not increase it. But we can increase it here to give it more flexibility. We're not taking money away from the HCB unless they find it's a good idea. They already have a fair amount of discretion with the money they get anyhow, so they probably could do things like this, like they did with the innovation grant for $2 million. They set that aside, but I want to highlight these things as things they can look at. So we might want to, why don't we think about that overnight, whether we want to raise the threshold higher. I see no harm in doing it, but putting $32 million into VHIP, that's not an enabling, that's a mandate.
Yeah, so I guess I would ask Jen, I know, because I asked Chris earlier, in some ways, the community partnership for neighborhood development, this project is planned in anticipation of also receiving infrastructure money that could be applied to it. Are you looking at all three of these as magnets for additional money that would possibly
Certainly.
make this possible and make it actually not just with the tiny amount of money we're appropriating at the moment for it?
Absolutely,
Okay.
and particularly with the community, yes, particularly with the community partnership for neighborhood development. And I would think these role in that was going to be providing housing funds, not necessarily from this $5 million, but from whatever resources we might be able to bring to make available in the community.
Right, so we should view this as more catalytic and not,
Yeah, that's very
is that fair to view this as catalytic
So
and
what-
not actually, this is the pool they're playing in because you can't swim very far with the money that's provided.
So what changes are you suggesting for community partnership for neighborhood development? I'm still having a hard time wrapping my arms around how that would proceed in the next year.
Well, it would take a good amount of work, and what's not included here is any capacity or staff in the department would need to actually make it happen, so. I don't know if they're gonna be at liberty to talk about that or not, but want to put that out there, that this would be, I think it would be a really great initiative that meets a lot of different goals, but it's gonna take some capacity, at the department's level. So the idea is that we've all been thinking about how to, about how to address cost barriers to housing development. We're doing it lots of different ways, permitting and other things. We know that a lot of the cost drivers of housing are land and infrastructure. And permitting can sometimes slow a project down at cost. So the fundamental idea here is to get everybody aligned and focused on specific communities who want in on this idea, to try to bring down the cost of some of those factors. So maybe a community might donate land, Heinsberg, or somebody, it wasn't the community, but there was a philanthropist that did that. The CHT's talked about that recently. But maybe there's a way in which a community can step up, streamline some permitting. Maybe there's land that the city owned or controlled, and the city of Montpelier's just, passed a bond to buy property at the edge of town. So maybe the community can help make the land available, could help with the permitting. And with all the infrastructure money available, maybe there's a way in which state agencies can align to make that easier or more for communities to access and pull a project together. And then maybe you have the Housing Conservation Board contributing money for some of the affordable units. You pull in a private developer who's pretty excited about this idea of all this consensus around this is where a project's going to go. And they think that's going to allow them to create some market rate housing. And then the Vermont Housing Finance Agency perhaps can make a really focused effort to make sure that the down payment assistance or other financial assistance to households to buy in at different income levels are able to access that. So that's the idea. With all this infrastructure money coming, how do we be more intentional about where it goes? And it's consistent with what you have been talking about wanting to address cost barriers so that we can get more housing built in like that starter home range in the missing middle, as well as the governor's desires around really making transformative change and encouraging all of his agencies to work together to do that at the community level. So that's the idea. But it's going to take a lot of coordination.
This enabling language that says you can use up to $5 million, you can contribute up to $5 million towards the effort. You think that it's helpful in terms of drawing attention to the idea, you have legislative support to go forward and try and work something out, and probably come back with more details than having really started the project next year. So we form this cabinet, they're willing to put up this amount, they're willing to put up this amount, now we'll find a project or a town that wants to work with us, and we're off to the races in terms of new thinking.
Or maybe there needs to be, maybe a consultant needs to be hired to help facilitate some of this. So maybe there's some particular cost related to this idea that isn't typically what we do, or we don't have another source for. And you're saying to us, make this a priority. And we could use that funding to try to help advance it.
Okay.
So this is sort of sounding like a complete neighborhood idea. I mean, that it would entail upgrading water, sewer, lamp posts, sidewalks, roads, and housing, all in one shebang, right? And in some ways, it kind of like sounds like the marriage of mini TIFs with a housing project. Yes?
I don't know.
Okay, well, I mean, it sort of sounds like what we're trying to accomplish in that regard. So without having to go through the TIF process, which we know what part of the building would be happy with that, this is sort of that idea. I mean, it's enabling a huge piece of the infrastructure that would enable more housing in places that we're, and are we looking at existing communities where we would be upgrading water and sewer and sidewalks and roads and lampposts, or new altogether in an area that's lighted in a downtown, for example, in a, like, I can imagine a whole section of side of Woodstock that we could do this.
If I could add, I mean, it's not defined, but we know we work, we work in communities all the time. We know which communities have, an active housing group. Woodstock does. We know communities are looking how they can spend their local ARPA funds to support housing. I envision kind of a framework where we we have this opportunity. What is, bid for it? Who can bring what resources can the community bring to the table to draw down these additional infrastructure and housing resources to make something happen. There's a bit of language in there that talks about, smart growth, high density housing. So I would presume that it's proximate or close to the centers, so it achieves that goal as well.
So we can't say to you that this is fully vetted. We
No,
know exactly how it's gonna work. It's very conceptual.
It's a good idea. I think we should leave it in and let the house, work
Let the
on
house
some
flush it
more, but,
So,
to send this, and it's sort of like, in this committee, I think we're all in agreement that there are just too many silos out there. And this is one effort to bring all the people together on a sort of a pilot basis and figure out a way to come up with.
Well, the
less
language that
expensive housing.
and the changes that I had sent included things like just made the intent a little like more clear. Like the idea is to reduce the cost of some of the factors in housing in order to facilitate
right,
in agreed upon areas and to create a mixed income neighborhood, including homes that are missing for the middle right now, so to allow you to get at that goal in addition, but it also requires specific pieces related to affordability and
I guess my one additional question is, how does this interplay with your NDAs?
There would be a great overlay, that may be one of the factors that we consider. Does the community have a neighborhood development area? So we know the activity permitting is easier in that area. So the housing's can happen more quickly. Is a community that is actively pursuing a bylaw grant to make sure that their land use, their local regulations can support high density housing. So it's all can overlay.
And then the pieces that I had sent, which David has got another draft since I saw the last one, maybe it already includes this, but specifically mentions infrastructure funding through ARPA and the IIJA as, potential resources. And it's maybe too strong, but directs V-Trans and ANR and public safety, service to participate in this initiative.
So would we need to have that directive language here?
Well, it's up to the committee. I shared a draft,
Yeah,
so
David-
quickly, but I don't know if it's worth looking at or not.
David
Not
will get
now, but.
you sent it to David, right?
I sent it to David.
Okay, yeah.
David will get it to us when he's
Yeah.
back.
And it may help and it may not, but
Yeah.
you would ask me what
Yes,
our
Yeah.
additional ideas.
you
were.
would need that, I think, to make this, to realize this.
Well, agencies and staff are working really, really hard in a lot of different directions, so it helps set a priority.
Okay. Sounds good. Let's go back to the middle. Listen, we have Chris Donnelly here with us. Maybe Chris can give us an update on some of the stakeholder meetings. I realize my suggestion sort of kicks the can down the road, but it also, tries to, in the real world, what you see out there in terms of people who want to buy housing and how much they're willing to allow to go to shared equity. It does, I don't know if you saw the language that came up with it. It allows the agency, VHFA, to prioritize the shared equity model over just the discount model. So, but that probably they'll deal with that. So whatever you want to tell us, we'll go for about another 10 minutes, hopefully take a little break, and then we'll walk through the bill again. Thank you.
Okay, it's for the record, Chris Donnelly with Chapter Housing Trust. And I just saw this language this morning. So if I read this correctly, what you're talking about is helping fund that value gap, the difference between the development cost and the appraisal cost. If you want to make the home more affordable, then it falls under a shared equity model. And VHFA can prioritize that. We have been, stakeholders have been talking about a different approach that was a little bit more geared and closer to what the original proposal was. So I'd let them weigh in on how they feel about this. I would certainly be in support of this type of approach.
Well, where is we'll get to the witching hour here. Have you heard back from the administration as to whether you guys have an agreement on exact language?
I have not.
And you're not able to speak.
I can't speak.
Josh is not here, I don't think.
I did send the draft bill to Josh, so I'm not sure.
And I'm happy if you want to define shared equity, I'm happy to help with some of that language. This national construct.
So the two-part, the stakeholders, the administration stakeholders had a varying approach to affordability. One had limited affordability carried forward, the other had heavy affordability carried forward. This basically lets VHFA use both, and they can decide on a case-by-case basis or however they want which one they want to use. And the reason I did it that way is because I'm not convinced that people absolutely know what the marketplace is going to be out there. Everybody has been telling me at 100% of poverty, 120% of poverty, nobody's going to want your money. And I just don't believe that. I think they want to get into a home. They want to, get that. It's, essentially interest-free loan on one hand, or it's a shared equity thing. And clearly, people have been stepping up on shared equity at 80% of poverty. I'm not sure just because somebody has, $10,000, $20,000 more of income this year, they're going to say, I'll just continue to rent. It's still an attractive offer, and we should ask for some of that money back.
I agree.
So this basically doesn't make a firm decision one way or the other, but gives them the option. Okay? Maybe the House can dig into it further and be convinced one way or another. Maybe the parties can come together. But this gives an option to VHFA to do either with a priority, hopefully, towards shared equity.
My read of this language, though, just brings the subsidy down to the appraised cost. It doesn't bring any deeper subsidy than that. Would have to be a permanently affordable option. Am I reading this correctly?
You have to speak up.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
The intent was
Actually, I think probably
the
all need to
the
speak up.
intent was for a larger subsidy with just the value gap.
Right. So if there's a larger subsidy that supports the homeowner.
Right.
To get into the home, that's a shared equity or permanently affordable.
That is the part that would,
Right.
The value gap, as everybody's saying, is gone. It goes to build the house, it goes to the
It's a
developer.
one-time
We're
expense.
not trying to recapture any of that.
Yep.
And you're still allowed to give deeper subsidies. The question is, once you give that deeper subsidy, will the homeowner be subject to a shared equity formula, or will it just be subject to the discount being recovered over time, which is going to inflate because of inflation? And the other big thing that we put in there is that there's going to be a mechanism who the next homeowner is going to be. It's going to have to be below 120%. And I assume we'll hear from Maura. Somebody told me that they may have concern about certifying the next home buyer, and I just can't think of a program that VHFA does. It doesn't look into people's incomes. So why can't they certify this person?
They certify them for everything else.
Right.
For almost all their other programs.
So at this point in time, you're at least comfortable as using this as a version going forward into the House. Jen, this is not necessarily your issue, so
I haven't seen the latest proposal, been aware that there have been conversations and hoping that there would be a resolution, but
So,
I can't speak to what's in front of me right now.
Obviously, we'd like to hear from Josh Hanford and Laura on this latest language, and I'm sure they're watching. But if you can get us that today, make sure they give us a written response today, that would be great. And if they're available in the next hour, we'll also squeeze them in. But I think Senator Clarkson or Senator Bucket, any further questions before break? Okay, let's take.
Jan, it's on page 32 on this